The Harvey Weinstein story was on the cusp of coming out, and I spoke to the New York Times journalist who wrote that first story, and I told him everything. But I also thought that from that story, that initial New York Times story, potentially other women would come forward with NDAs, and I genuinely thought that would happen, but it didn't.
Zelda Perkins' courage didn't just change the law, it inspired a global movement. As the first woman to break an NDA with Harvey Weinstein, she exposed the misuse of NDAs and sparked a worldwide conversation about power, silence, and justice. Through Can't Buy My Silence, she's helped the UK government reform NDA laws to protect victims of harassment and discrimination.
Yes, Weinstein was a heinous abuser, but the whole point is that it's the system that enabled him. When somebody feels or has had an injustice, the most important thing is for them to be heard and seen.
Zelda, thank you so much for coming on the show. I am honoured we've got your time today, and I know already this is going to be such a powerful episode, because when I think of courage and I look at what you've achieved and done, that for me just sums up courage. So thank you first, I just want to say, for everything you've done. And for those that might not be so familiar, would you mind just starting is what it is you've been campaigning for and how it all began?
Yeah, of course. And thanks very much for having me. I have run a campaign called Can't Buy My Silence, and I campaign against the misuse of NDAs, not the total ban of NDAs, just the misuse of NDAs. And that was born out of me having signed a very, very onerous and egregious NDA when I was about 24, when I was working for Harvey Weinstein. And he assaulted my assistant. I had worked for him for about 5 years. I knew that he was very difficult to deal with. He had never sexually assaulted me. I had suffered enormous amounts of sexual harassment. But in the 90s, we didn't have that vocabulary. And I'm afraid to say it was fairly normal. You know, what's interesting is Harvey's become the kind of poster ogre for sexual harassment, but he certainly was not original or alone in that behaviour, and it still is going on today. I broke that NDA in 2017, and I broke it. I had tried to break it several times before, but I broke it in 2017 because the Harvey Weinstein story was on the cusp of coming out. And I spoke to the New York Times journalist who wrote that first story, and I told them everything. I broke my NDA, I gave them all the information, but they couldn't use me as a named source because they were too afraid themselves, as the New York Times, to break the NDA, essentially. They were protecting me.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. But interestingly, once that story came out, I was so incensed, weirdly, in how little of the information that I had given them that they'd used or been able to use legally, that I was determined then to break the NDA fully. But I also thought that from that story, that initial New York Times story, potentially other women would come forward with NDAs, and I felt like if a whole bunch of us broke, we'd be safer. And I genuinely thought that would happen, but it didn't. I was also very keen to make sure that the focus of the story didn't just become the perpetrator. Yes, Weinstein was a heinous abuser, but the whole point is that it's the system that enabled him and that continues to enable. And right now we're in a huge scandal of the Epstein, Prince Andrew, issues. And it's the same thing. Those in power can act with impunity. We cannot change human nature, but we can change the systems. We create these systems. We wrote law. I mean, humans are crazy. They wrote law to protect themselves from themselves. So you can change the law. You can improve the law. And we all have the power to do that. And in a way, we all have a duty to do that. And maybe I shouldn't use the word duty, but certainly I think if you have a personal experience, it becomes not a duty, it becomes a must. And I think when, it's very kind of you to say that I'm courageous, but I always find it very problematic when people call what I did then brave.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I called out Harvey at the time in 1998. And what was so shocking for me was that I was shut down by the law. I wasn't shut down by Harvey. I was shut down by the law. And that broke me as a young woman far more than the bad behaviour of one man in power. So for me, the story was always much more about the system, the systemic problem. And so when the story broke in 2017, I wanted to make sure that everybody didn't just use Harvey as a scapegoat and that actually real change happened. Because whether Harvey was going to go to jail or not, and we didn't know what was going to happen at that point, I genuinely didn't think he would go to jail at that point. But whether he went to jail or not wasn't going to change the system. No. It would just make people in power be a bit more careful or use the law even more deviously. So I really wanted to draw the attention to what I felt was the root of the problem.
And that is, as you say, the root of the problem. The root of the problem is massive. That systemic issue is worldwide and huge. So this is where I probably use the word courage, and I can understand you don't want people to maybe think that's maybe brave to maybe stop people doing it or thinking only certain people can do it, that it's that actually everyone can do it. And this is the belief I have, is everyone's got the courage within them. It's actually helping people know just how to access that courage. It doesn't belong to certain people. We've all got it. Where did you sit there and go, do you know what? I'm going to take this on. Where did this come from? Or where did you even go, how do I start with this?
Oh, it wasn't as thought out as that at all. I mean, for me, it was just an essential need. When I saw the New York Times story come out, to me, it wasn't strong enough. It wasn't clear enough. And I felt like this was the potential moment of changing things, and that I didn't think that article was going to do it. I mean, I'm looking now in hindsight. I mean, it went stratospheric. The Me Too, although the Me Too movement was started by Tarana Burke a lot earlier, that was a sort of second birth of the Me Too movement around Harvey. And actually, that's what protected me. And that's what kind of gave me, I suppose, the shield that if I had done what I had done without that, I don't think I would be in the position that I'm in now. I genuinely think the reason that I managed to be so untouched, essentially, was because of that huge tsunami, that tidal wave of Me Too, which I just kind of surfed on. Yeah. But I didn't have a strategy. I mean, my only strategy was actually very similar to when the initial event happened, which was, if I go and tell the grown-ups, they'll deal with it. I thought if I speak to lawyers or police or, justice will be served. And I was disavowed of that incredibly quickly. And that was a horrible experience. And I went through an experience that I would describe as legal waterboarding. You know, my colleague and I, as young, 20-year-olds, being taken through the negotiations of one of the most horrible settlement agreements you'll see, which meant that we weren't allowed to speak to the police, our family, our friends, the HMRC, a therapist. We weren't allowed to speak to each other ever again. And it ended up with actually making our lives completely impossible. And both my colleague and I, separately, without speaking to each other because we weren't allowed to after we'd signed the agreement, having to leave our homes, having to leave the UK because we couldn't actually function under the strictures of that agreement. When you can't talk to your family and friends and you can't talk to a future employer, you don't realise that when you're signing the agreement, but the ripple effect that has on one's life in every area is beyond comprehension.
Can you try and just describe a little bit of what a day would be like for you in terms of the thoughts and how you felt, like just to kind of bring that to life for us? Because we can't, it's very difficult to imagine. What was that like to feel so constrained?
Well, it's a slow creep. You don't quite realise what's happened until, the dust begins to settle. I mean, even going through the negotiation process in itself was so terrifying and torturous. I was a young, very inexperienced girl. I was 24, 25. I'd never dealt with a lawyer. I'd never, been in a negotiation. I thought if you called out a sexual assault, that everyone would be on my side. I wasn't expecting to be felt like I was being criminalized. I wasn't expecting to be put under high pressure and disapproval and scare tactics. And, we were kept in those legal offices overnight. We did a session where we were having to negotiate from 5 in the afternoon to 5 in the morning. I mean, it's basically...
So they were just breaking you down?
Yeah. And we were kept isolated. We weren't allowed pen and paper. I mean, it was an extraordinary experience. And then, to get out of that, to survive that, you then, just that in itself. And I couldn't talk to anybody when that was happening. Can you imagine going home?
Just being shut.
And not being able to say to somebody, I'm going through this negotiation because of these things. And then I guess you think that when it's over, then you'll be able to kind of express yourself in some way. You don't understand the impact that then, once that's finished, and our lawyers said to us, you have to imagine that this is like a black hole in your life. You just can't speak about anything around this moment. This was also my most proud job. It was my first really successful job. And I worked for Harvey for nearly 5 years, and I did incredibly well with him because actually I had very strong boundaries with him because I was so young and inexperienced. I didn't want anything from him. I didn't really know who he was. I hadn't got into that job from an ambitious point of view. I got into that job by mistake. So I was kind of accidentally, I seem to do everything by accident. Accidentally, I was very protected because to me, what was the worst thing that could happen? I'd get fired. And at that point, it was my first job. So I was like, I'll get another job. When you're sort of 22, you don't really understand. So I think ultimately my nature was always underlying this. When the assault happened, I went straight to Harvey and confronted him. I led the fight in our negotiations. That's just part of my nature. I guess I'm a naturally combative person. But in terms of breaking the NDA in 2017 and then having to take on the battle, because again, in 2017, when I broke my NDA, I thought, I'll tell the grown-ups. This time it wasn't the lawyers. This time I was like, okay, if I can tell Parliament... And I mean, literally, I didn't even know the words. I was like, how do I tell the politicians? How do I tell Parliament about what's happened so that they can change the law? That was all I had in my head. And I was very lucky because I was interviewed on Newsnight by Emily Maitlis. And God bless Emily Maitlis and God bless the BBC for editing it so beautifully, which made me look fantastic because they could have edited it in a different way. And I think that's something that people need to always be very aware of when they go into the public domain. Once you tell your story publicly and once you tell your story to the media, you lose control of it immediately. It's like a child. It grows its own personality and it walks away from you. And you can't control how that story develops or is developed by other people. And so a lot of it is luck. And I was very lucky because that interview went stratospherically, wide, and it reached a lot of MPs.
Good.
And so I then had an immediate gateway into Westminster, which I had never, ever experienced. I've never been to Westminster. I've never spoken to a MP. And I was, again, very fortunate because I got picked up and championed by some incredible ministers, incredible MPs, Maria Miller at the time being one of the first and Jess Phillips. And I had the opportunity to give evidence at 2 select committees. And I thought, oh, great, this is easy. Isn't our democracy wonderful? I've told all the grown-ups. They've all been so shocked because they were. Everybody was so shocked. And for me, that was extraordinary because I had spent 20 years of my life thinking that I was the wrong one. I was a baddie, that I was in trouble, that I was the problem. And the validation of, one, the public and media, but two, MPs taking really seriously and saying what you did was right and what happened to you was wrong, was enormous.
Yeah, you're finally being seen.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, that's often all they need. They don't need it from the media, but they need somebody to go, yes, what's happened to you was wrong.
Yeah, I see you.
I see you, and let's try and make that change.
Yeah.
You know, and you can take that macro, you know, as big or small as you want. That's all it's about. When somebody feels or has had an injustice, the most important thing is for them to be heard and seen. And actually, the sooner you hear someone and see them, the less escalation there is around the problem.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that is a lesson going forward in the kind of employment environment that I very much see.
Yeah. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't already, to please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It's a small action that makes a big difference. You'll be the first to know when new episodes drop, and your support helps us create meaningful content for leaders like you. I'd also love to hear from you, so if you have any thoughts, questions or ideas, pop them into the comments. And if you're curious about how my leadership coaching or training could support you or your team, just drop me a DM and we'll set up a call. Thanks so much. Now let's get back to the episode.
I hadn't kind of caught up with myself. You know, I was 45 when I broke my NDA in 2017. But I was still really retarded in that 25-year-old's psychology and emotion. And I still felt like a small, very young woman with no power, no voice, shouldn't really be there. And I thought when I spoke to the select committees, then that would be it. And I'd go back to my job working in theatre. But of course, what happened was everybody looked at me and was like, yeah, this is awful. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I realised that, you know, obviously MPs have 1,000 issues to deal with. And they do an incredible job, but you have to be the one pushing that lever. The lever is there for all of us to access of democracy.
Okay.
MPs work for us, you know, and I think we all forget that. We all sit around complaining, but they're our employees. We have a responsibility to guide them.
Yeah.
And you know what I experienced and suddenly learnt was they really will work for you if you engage, but you have to engage.
And I guess you have to keep showing up and
you
show
have
that
to keep
this
showing
is
up. And that's not possible for everybody.
No.
It was possible for me because yet again, I essentially lost my job.
Right.
I didn't lose my job, but it was not possible for me to work because I had 3 months of press camping outside my house, of being part of several legal kind of cases that were going on, the Weinstein case, my own case against the Solicitors Regulatory Authority. I was also, you know, we both, myself and my colleague, were looking if there were legal protection or legal loopholes around our agreement because we didn't know if we were going to be pursued by Weinstein or not. So it was a very turbulent, complex time, which continued for 3 years, and the media heat continued for nearly 3 years. And it didn't really stop until COVID. It was during COVID that I realised that when and if COVID and lockdown stopped, you know, everything had gone back to zero. We'd also had a government or a leadership change, and we'd gone from Theresa May, who had promised to stop the scourge of NDAs. So again, I thought, marvellous, isn't our democracy great? It's all going to be done, you know, in a couple of years. Obviously, Boris Johnson's government, it wasn't in his top priority to get rid of secret settlements. You know, as we know, it's part of keeping the hierarchy of power in place, and it's a tool that we know Boris Johnson has used personally, let alone on, you know, a larger level. So it wasn't top of his list of things to deal with. And it went back to zero. It went back to zero during COVID. And I think probably the only moment the first moment of real bravery for me was acknowledging and stepping forward into reigniting this as lockdown stopped and creating a public-facing campaign with a silly name and...
Oh, Can't Buy My Silence.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant name.
Well, but do you know what I mean? Like, you know, before it was just me doing the
fighting
work.
and stuff, Like,
basically, I didn't change anything.
Yeah.
It became an organisation. It became a thing.
Proper
it had
campaign.
a slogan. It had which I kind of not wanted to do. I just wanted to deal with the people who could make the change and get on with it.
Yep.
And I think I could have achieved that if there hadn't been a leadership change in government and if COVID hadn't come. But, you know, life doesn't happen as you wish.
You've put Can't Buy My Silence out there now. This is a campaign. You're behind this. This is like a really cause-driven. I'm guessing it's going to be taking up a lot of your time as well. What was happening for you inside? How are you coping with this? How are you leading this?
This was the most challenging part. And this is the part where I think maybe the tenacity or the having to be very robust actually had to come into play. Everything I'd done up to that point was reactive. You know, I was just following my gut completely. I wasn't talking to anybody about what to do or how to do it. I was just, you know, just running and pushing. With the campaign, I initially started it with a Canadian law professor, retired law professor, who had some experience in campaigning. So all of a sudden, you know, there was somebody to kind of discuss a form of strategy with. I mean, she very much was, you know, working in Canada and I was working in the UK. We never physically met initially. But I also was coming out of lockdown where I'd lost the person who brought me up, essentially my mother, and my other closest female friend. And so I was in a very, very vulnerable state. And I really didn't want to start the campaign, but I knew I had to. And I don't know if I would have had the strength to have done that if I hadn't been being pushed by a partner.
Okay.
So in many ways, you know, having a partner pushing was what pushed me over that line to do the public-facing campaign. But again, in terms of strategy, you know, it was interesting because I found any strategy conversations very frustrating because I was just like, I just want to do, and I kind of feel like I know what to do. Or I know what I feel like I want to do. And I found a lot of the kind of strategic conversations felt almost like time wasting. Okay. And I think this is the big difference between personally driven campaigning, personal experience campaigning, and sort of organizations, you know, looking after a cause. I think when you're campaigning from a personal experience, it's a very different thing. Yeah. It was, I mean, the first year was incredibly challenging. You know, I was working on my own at home, having spent what felt like 2 years isolated and alone already, and having to get up every morning and go and sit at my desk and essentially, you know, bite people's ankles endlessly, took an enormous amount of determination and strength. I think a lot of that was just my internal personal need and drive that I had lost my anonymity. I had again lost my career essentially by breaking my NDA because this had become my new identity, whether I wanted it or not. Yeah. And for me, there was no question of me stopping until I achieved the goal that I had set, which was to change the law, which, because it had seemed so achievable in that first couple of years, I believed would be done. Yep. But to have lost so much, essentially, in terms of privacy, in terms of, I mean, just so many things. And I mean, even down to silly things like, you know, for me, seeing myself on camera, having photographs taken, hearing my voice, I'm not that person. And on a personal level, having to just tough that out and go, I'm not liking any of this. It makes me feel uncomfortable. I hate seeing myself. But I also understood the power that the bit of profile I had at that time had. I didn't understand why. I was like, well, this seems to be working. I seem to speak to people. You know, I was being contacted by hundreds of women and men, but mostly women. And I felt at this point now I had a huge responsibility to them, not just myself, to make sure that this was done. Yeah. So there was no question of not doing it, but I can tell you
what it took.
the majority of mornings I'd be crawling to my desk on my hands and knees, wishing I wasn't having to do it.
Yeah.
But not feeling I had a choice.
You had to, because you used a term when we were speaking, which stopped me in my tracks, actually, because it's not a term I've used, because we've talked about, and I talk a lot about bullying in organisations, but when you said, I actually realised I was bullying myself.
Yeah.
And I think people listening to this might actually just, a few people who'd be sitting there going, oh my God, that is what I'm doing to myself.
Yeah.
When did you have that moment when you realised that's what you were doing?
Well, it's funny, we have two brains. I was very cognitively aware that I was being hard on myself, but I also felt like, well, who else is going to drive me if I'm not beating myself up? And if I'm not there going, you're not doing enough, you've got to be on it more. You can't feel low and not do stuff. There isn't an excuse. There isn't anyone to pick it up. So you've got, get back up, get on, stop being weak, do more. I was aware of that, but I hadn't understood that it was really what I then identified as self-bullying until I had somebody start working for me a year ago. So that's very recent.
Okay.
I got a brilliant young man started working for me almost exactly a year ago. And he really got the campaign, and his enthusiasm and pride in the campaign kind of slightly blindsided me. And I sort of initially kind of was a bit patronising. I just sort of laughed. I was like, isn't he sweet? He thinks like this is some big thing.
Yeah.
He thinks that I'm like some big thing. He thinks the campaign is some big thing. It's not. It's absolutely rubbish. But, if he wants to think that, he can.
Yeah.
And then, in that very sort of first few months, he had all this enthusiasm, and he'd bring me and he'd go, oh, this has happened, or that's happened, or this journalist wrong. And I'd kind of be like, and so what? And he'd be so crestfallen. And I suddenly realised, well, I can't do that to him. I can't treat him like I treat myself. And then that was the moment where I realised how aggressive I was being to myself. And I learnt so much from having somebody who actually taught me to have pride in the campaign and actually to stop bullying myself so much. There was also a bit of an issue because there was an issue within the campaign with my co-founder in Canada, where I just realised I had kind of slipped into a similar kind of relationship with that. And again, for myself, I had coping mechanisms. But when, there were issues with the Canadian team, they grew quite a team. And they came to me, feeling, with issues. That was then when I actually really had to face what had been happening in that relationship.
Okay.
And again, a little bit like with my initial issue, it wasn't until it was hurting someone else that I had the ability to do something about it.
That's interesting, isn't it? That we do less for ourselves, but we'll go and fight for others.
Yeah, it's much easier.
Yeah.
It's much easier to fight for other people. It's much easier. And I think maybe also that's where the word bravery comes into the individual, because I think actually if you speak up for yourself,
it's brave.
it is brave. I feel like I've always spoken up for other people, which to me feels natural and easy. I mean, to go back to the moniker of bravery or courage, it's not so much that I feel like we need to tell people that they all have it and they can all access it. I feel like we need to change the cultural vocabulary around it. It's not brave, it's normal. It is normal to speak up when something bad happens. When you call it brave, that suggests
that you shouldn't.
Yeah. So,
Very interesting.
Obviously you can't just immediately go, oh, well, anybody who speaks up is just normal. But in terms of moving things forward culturally, and in terms of how you talk about whistleblowing, again, I feel is a very negative word. So the vocabulary around all of these things, to me, needs to be dialed down, needs to be normalised. Speaking up is normal. We all spend our life being taught at school or as children, that saying when something's wrong and not lying is the correct thing to do. Then you get out into the work world and suddenly everything's turned around the other way.
You're suppressed. That just highlights how is you go back to this, it's the system. The fact that you're so right, the fact that we've got to a place where we'll say to someone, oh, that was really courageous because you spoke up in that meeting and defended someone or spoke up for yourself. How the system has made that a courageous act, not something that it should be totally normal we do to look after ourselves and what is right and wrong.
And speaking up shouldn't be an aggressive act. You shouldn't have, you know, and this is something that I do try and explain to businesses when I go and speak to them, is that you shouldn't be afraid of transparency, because actually if you deal with stuff right at the beginning, when it's potentially just microaggressions and people feel comfortable to say, I didn't feel comfortable with that. But that doesn't mean they have to run to HR and there has to be disciplinaries and, you know, you go into the stratosphere of tribunals. You know, if people can catch things at the beginning, if when you're in an office environment you see somebody making an inappropriate joke, then everybody in that room should be able to go, hey, buddy, that's not okay.
Yeah.
And that also is helpful to everybody.
Yeah.
You know, it helps if everybody's open about boundaries. You know, the big confusion is, you know, and particularly with Me Too, a lot of the kind of, you know, male dialogue became, well, how do we know what we're allowed to say or not say? Well, that's true. How do you know? I mean, I'll give them some slack, but I mean, essentially everybody knows deep down if what they're saying is right or not. But let's cut everybody a bit of slack and say, okay, well, sometimes it's on the edge.
Yeah.
Well, if nobody says anything,
how do they know?
Then it begins to escalate. So then you go a bit closer to the edge, then you go over the edge, then you do something that really is stepping across a line.
Yeah.
And this is why then in a work environment, you know, we have so many issues and, you know, you have HR and then you have tribunal and then it all gets really messy. And something that essentially started off as probably quite a small misunderstanding
that doesn't get dealt with
was allowed to grow.
What's your view on, you know, we always say, right, you praise in public, but you criticise in private. Because when you said, like, you know, if you're in a room and says someone an appropriate joke, that you should be able to, in that moment, just go, do you know what, mate, that's not okay. I think sometimes people are confused of what is that, say nice things in public, but in private, like, because you don't want to, I think people are worried about humiliating people or hurting somebody's feeling, or if you do it in some, I think there's so much confusion of when do you do it, the appropriateness to do it, and how you make others feel.
If somebody's made an inappropriate joke, which is already making somebody feel humiliated and upset, it's far better for someone just to go, you don't need to go, how dare you, that's really bad. Just go, that makes me feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Ask the person, you know, have you checked in with that person?
Yeah.
I think you should check in. Because the thing is we also all have different levels of sensitivity.
Yep.
And for one part, like you could say a whole load of shit to me and it's just going to bounce straight off me.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a good thing. It's just because I've been through quite tough training.
Yeah.
You know, but you could say something to somebody else or somebody from a different generation. And I think that's also, you know, a very obvious issue these days is that different generations have very different boundaries.
And what they make things mean as well.
Yeah. And so you just ask, you say. And if it's an open conversation, you know, you're much more likely to be able to diffuse the situation if everybody can be honest and speak and say, I'm not going after, I'm just telling you that makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. And being okay if you have said something that has made someone be uncomfortable and it's never your intention to hurt, you thought it was funny or you thought you're just not aware. I suppose it's also equipping those people of how to respond when you get called out. So then you don't then get aggressive or get defensive. It's like, look, we're just all learning here. And he's saying it comes back to that culture, allowing that to be.
We're in a community. We're in a community. A work environment is a false, you know, sort of forced community.
Yeah.
You know, you don't choose each other. You're all put in a community. You all have to work together. If a business is going to run successfully, then everybody needs to work together successfully. And it does need to come from the top that people feel that they are in an environment where they can talk about things, where they can point things out. And that is only going to make a business work better. I mean, the new legislation that is coming in, I know, is causing a lot of furore within businesses and in the legal sector, because by taking away the ability to use confidentiality to hide allegations of wrongdoing terrifies businesses because they think that there's going to be a lot of vexatious complaints. But that's just not how it works. And actually, it's going to be a positive because what's going to happen is people are going to take more personal responsibility about how they behave because they know that they can't hide it. And the ones that are what I would call incontinent abusers, who literally cannot help themselves, they will get weeded out super fast. So you then, as a business, do not end up colluding with somebody who is consistently behaving badly.
Yep.
You know, so that you end up in a situation where you've got a manager who's got 3 or 4 NDAs against them, and all of a sudden you realise, as for the business's reputation, you look twice as bad.
Yeah.
Because people are breaking NDAs now. People are not respecting that confidentiality because people have been empowered over the last 5-6 years, seeing lots of these high-profile cases now breaking, is that actually your business reputation is going to be far more damaged if you're also found to have tried to hide allegations of misconduct.
Yeah.
If you have dealt with those allegations, then there's nothing, you know, you've done the best you can. And if it's a vexatious person, well, to be honest, they'll hang themselves.
Yep.
And if they're vexatious, we do have libel and defamation laws to protect that. You know, those laws are in place. That's not what confidentiality and NDAs are there for. If victims want to have confidentiality in one of these situations, because of course there's always going to be settlements, there are always going to be situations where it's he said, she said, there isn't, you know, enough proof, it's too complicated. This isn't trying to stop settlements. What it's trying to do is to put some equality in the bargaining and to make sure that the victims in the situation can choose for it to be confidential if they so wish, but not the alleged perpetrator.
What do you think? Because I've been meeting a lot of people who have gone through corporate bullying to different levels of extreme and listening to their stories and what's been going on. What do you think in terms of, especially when it's at the top and it's really coming from the top, this bad behaviour, and it's been accepted, and the culture today is you don't speak, you don't want to become the next victim, and there's such a fear-based culture. What do you think? Because I think with the NDA, it's brilliant. Everyone just knowing you're protected. But a lot of these people are very scared of losing their jobs. They're scared of maybe still even being the first one to speak. Within those systems, what are you hoping the campaigning you've been doing is actually going to be able to change for people to go, actually, we can speak without feeling like a whistleblower, without feeling I'm going to lose my job, or be known as that, or that, don't hire that person, she'll do this.
Well, it's not going to happen overnight because this is a huge cultural change as well. But for any cultural change to be effective, it has to have the legislative backup because that's the kind of the root of being able to change the culture. Genuinely, by taking away the mechanism that hides bad behaviour, means people will have more confidence in being able to speak because they're not going to be at risk of being shut down. One of the things in the legislation, which is absolutely fantastic, is, you know, bullying is difficult because there isn't a statutory definition of bullying, and there are you know, there's some great campaigns working on trying to get a statutory definition for bullying. But in terms of the legislation that we have, you know, got change with, which covers discrimination and harassment, which covers a huge amount of issues. What's so fantastic about this new amendment is that it's not just if you've experienced discrimination or harassment yourself, it's if you've witnessed it or if you've heard about it. And also, nothing can stop you from talking about how your employer dealt with the complaint if you made the complaint. So there's lots of great stops there to actually make individuals take more personal responsibility and bosses and organisations take more responsibility because they can't slide out at any point. There's another piece of legislation that's gone through in the Workers' Protection Act, which means that if you're sexually that businesses have to take much more responsibility around actively stopping and risk assessing any form of sexual harassment. So all of these pieces are all beginning to lock in together to make sure that, you know, people who are in a vulnerable position because of the hierarchy of power, and it's always going to be there, and there has to be a hierarchy of power in a workplace, but so that it cannot be abused in the way that it is being abused.
Yeah.
And then this is further backed up by the Victims and Prisoners Act and the Victims and Courts Bill, which are Victims and Prisoners Act has come in, and the Victims and Courts Act is about to come in, which deals with confidentiality NDAs around criminal acts. Now, you would assume that an NDA was always void around a criminal act. Well, it is, but it's not actually written into legislation, and it's about what people understand. And what people understand when they've been through a negotiation for NDAs is that they must never speak, they can't speak to anybody. It said in my agreement, I had to use my best endeavours not to speak to the police, to not ever identify Weinstein. And if I had to speak to the police or another lawyer for a civil reason, that I had to give Miramax and, Harvey Weinstein's lawyers 48 hours notice. Wow. So even though those things essentially were illegal, you can write whatever you want in a settlement because it's a private contract. But now that in legislation it is void, and it is in there, it is void any agreement that is hiding. If you believe you're a victim of crime, so any form of criminal act, you can speak to anyone. Wow. Anyone, including the media. Now that's for a criminal act.
Okay.
But I mean, if you're sexually assaulted at work, that's a criminal act.
Yes.
So all of these pieces are now really beginning to dovetail together.
Wow.
And the government is taking a very, very serious and clear-eyed look at trying to bring confidence back into the British justice system and to address, the toxicity that has grown in, quietly in the cave of the workplace environment and has become, as you say, almost the norm.
It's scary how it's becoming the norm and almost accepted that, that's what you're going to come across.
I think it's always been there. I think the point is now people are actually acknowledging it and speaking about it. And the next step is people are going to start
doing something,
disseminating it, stopping it from happening, realising that they don't have to go to the press or go to HR, but they can just call stuff out, and that their business and individuals have to take more responsibility, take it more seriously when people speak up.
I'm noticing the things where we're seeing the change, or people who have successfully made changes, when there's been a collective voice.
Always.
Whenever there's this solo voice, they just get paid off and asked to leave, and as you said, seen as the problem.
Yeah.
So I think because I'm trying to think at the moment what sort of strategies could help, and it's like, how do we get to that point where we can build a collective and people are willing to support each other to go, this is not okay, and I'm willing to be part of that collective to drive that change.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting because a lot of companies, over the last few years, where the sort of DE&I objectives were quite strong. I mean, that's now changing because of what's happening in the States, unfortunately. But so many businesses, I go to them, they go, oh, but we've got an anonymous speak up line, and we've got. Then I'm like, no, that doesn't work.
No.
It needs to be transparent. You need people to have the confidence to actually to say stuff, and that's how you make it collective. Keeping things anonymous, keeping people siloed, is literally the worst thing you can do, because that isolates people. I mean, we saw this at Channel 4, and I'm not breaking any privacy laws now because we broke it in Parliament, but. The women at Channel 4, there was a whole group of women who were encouraged to come forward and speak about their issues. The moment they came forward individually and spoke about their issues, they were all siloed from each other and picked off. And that's because they followed the system that was meant to help. And I think, again, it's about changing the culture from the top, that bosses, instead of automatically seeing the people who speak up as the problem, seeing that actually it's probably the alleged perpetrator that's the problem, and starting there rather than starting by immediately trying to silence the people who are speaking up, because the people who do speak up tend to be the people you want in your company because they care.
Yeah, because they could just leave.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're sharing it, they're caring, they want it to be better, and they're probably willing to help be part of the change as well.
They're the people that need to be embraced.
Yeah.
And yes, of course, there's always going to be a mad frog in there somewhere. But listen, we don't go to the lowest common denominator. We don't not have a benefit system because some people cheated.
Yeah.
You know, so to me, it's
change.
It's a culture. It's turning the telescope round the other way. And it's not something to be afraid of. It's actually something to be positive. And I think I hope that businesses will be able to grasp this positively. And I think by the legislation kind of being so all-encompassing in a way, this is happening. Whether businesses want it or not, this is happening.
So start getting ready for the change.
You can no longer hide misconduct with confidentiality in a pre-dispute agreement, in a settlement agreement, in your initial employment agreement. You can't do that because anything that does that will be void. And if you're putting that in your agreement, you're a bad boss. Who's going to come and want to work for companies that have that, that mechanism in when it's been publicly exposed, when it's in legislation? Before it was kind of standard. Nobody really knew. It was all a bit, all a bit dark arts. Everyone kind of was like, do I know? I don't know. How many CEOs actually really knew? How many board members actually knew or know how many NDAs there are?
Just a quick reminder, if you haven't already, to please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It's a small action that makes a big difference. You'll be the first to know when new episodes drop, and your support helps us create meaningful content for leaders like you. I'd also love to hear from you, so if you have any thoughts, questions or ideas, pop them into the comments. And if you're curious about how my leadership coaching or training could support you or your team, just drop me a DM and we'll set up a call. Thanks so much. Now let's get back to the episode. So if I was to go and work at a company, once this all legislation goes forward, would I be able to see that with the company's reputation and what's going on? Is there going to be, like you have like Trustpilot, where you can go and see reviews. Will you be able to find out the company you're about to choose to work for, what they follow?
No, but you have the right to ask.
Okay.
I mean, there isn't like a Trustpilot mechanism. I mean, that is something that could be done.
Yeah.
But in a way, again, this is legislative.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't even need to be highlighted. But initially, I think it's something that's really important. And this is part of the educational part of a campaign, is that people understand their rights. Because, we can change legislation. But that doesn't mean that people actually know their rights. It doesn't mean that when somebody's signing their employment contract that they realise that it's important that they check what the confidentiality provisions are in there. It's fine having confidentiality in your contract, as long as that confidentiality isn't trying to stop you from talking about anything harmful that might happen to you.
So difficult though, because when I'm thinking about it, you start asking that in an interview, you can just see bosses' red flags going off, going, hang on, why are they asking about confidentially? What sort of person are they? Or can we trust them? You can see how the behaviour and the beliefs need to shift, don't we?
Absolutely. But in a way, that's what I'm saying. You shouldn't have to ask, because the thing is even if you sign your employment contract and it still has the wrong sort of confidentiality,
the legislation still protects you.
It's void. It doesn't work. But you need to know that. But also, employers and GCs in companies need and this is the only work that they're going to have to do in terms of on an administrative scale, is they are going to have to remove a lot of their standard confidentiality clauses and reword them, and that is a good thing. I mean,
it's a brilliant thing. And if there's a leader sitting here listening to this, like trying to get like their heads around it, okay, what does this mean? What's that going to change? What does it mean for me if I'm in a bad situation at the moment, or if I'm a leader that's creating this bad situation in my company? What would you say in terms of, we go really practical, what's sort of like the 1 to 3 practical steps for them to understand this legislation, think about how to look at their culture, and what are some steps in terms of also the education? Because I think a lot of people are going to need to be educated on this and understand what it means. What with Can't Buy My Silence, is that going into that space to help companies? Or is it you've got the legislation and you're done? You're like, I've done my bit, which is amazing what you've done.
Right now, I want to run for the hills. I've spent 7 years of my life fighting tooth and nail, and you can't underestimate the amount of personal energy that has taken, and I need a rest. Yeah. And it's not just 7 years of fighting, it's 20 years of living under the cosh of my NDA before that. So for me, right at this moment, I just need a little bit of regenerative time. I kind of feel that, you know, it's an opportunity for somebody to go in there and do that. And maybe after some time out, it might be something that I look at. But the reality is it's really simple. And to me, you know, there are lots of companies that go in and do corporate education. And to me, they're slightly... I think it's a bit of money for old rope. Okay. Because they make something which is often quite simple very complicated, and that's when the whole tick box thing comes in. If you haven't done this course and you haven't done that, then, you know, that's how you show that you're a good company. Yeah. But actually, if I'm speaking to a CEO or a HR person or a general counsel, this is really simple. You cannot use confidentiality to hide any form of misconduct. Full stop. That's it. It's not complicated.
So then start looking at how you start stamping out misconduct.
It will stamp out misconduct in its just by its existence. Okay. If you make it very clear to your employees that that's what's going to happen, that will start stopping it. Now, obviously, it's not going to mean that there's no bad behaviour and that there isn't conflict. There is always going to be conflict in a workplace. Yeah. But listen, it's not, you know, taking away confidentiality is not going to like blow every business up. In the States, over 27 states have legislated against the misuse of NDAs in varying forms, but usually, mostly, majoritatively around sexual misconduct. Now, lawyers and businesses have said, oh, if you take away confidentiality, you're taking away the ability to settle for victims, because what business is going to settle if they don't get confidentiality? Well, if the law says that you can't have it, then, you know, the businesses still have to settle. Yeah. You know, you're settling not for silence. You're settling because you're agreeing not to go to tribunal. Yeah. The victim is agreeing and you're agreeing to not take it further legally. That's what a settlement is. Yeah. So settlements will become much clearer and much better. And can I tell you something? In the States, settlements have gone up by 10%. Wow. Not down. And the settlements amounts haven't drastically changed. And the reality is that most settlements offer very small amounts of money. It's only, you know, the occasional ones where you're talking about hundreds of thousands of pounds. And also, if people want to keep the amount, you know, the amount confidential, that's fine. That's not a misconduct. Yeah. But you cannot stop people having the human right of talking about what's happened to them in a settlement, in a reasonable settlement. And it is not, it is the threat of being silenced that is chilling people. Yeah. And the reason that people go to the press is because they've been silenced, and it wrecks their lives, and they end up, you know, breaking down and realizing that they can't continue their life until they speak publicly. Yeah. And the only safe place to speak is publicly in the media, because that's the only place they can find protection. But if you take that away, actually businesses' reputations are going to be safer, because you're going to deal with stuff
in the right way.
In the right way and quicker.
Can you quite believe, after, this whole 27 years of your life, of what this has been, can you quite believe that you're nearly there? Has it sank in yet, what you've been able to do?
Well, yes and no. Yeah. Like, there's part of me that say, well, of course, this is, in a way, this was such a simple, clearly moral and ethical question. So there's part of me, the kind of the idealistic part of me, you know, never doubted that it couldn't happen. But then the self-flagellating, bullying part of me also kind of can't believe that I have managed to get here. Yeah. Or that we have managed to get. I mean, I haven't done this by myself. This is, you know, there have been so many brave people who have spoken up, because the more people that broke their NDAs and spoke up, you know, around the Crispin Odey story, the Neil Gaiman story, the Russell Brand story, you know, all of these women who came forward, you know, what happened at the post office, all of these stories educated the media and the press into understanding that NDAs are at the root of all of these scandals. And, you know, and then the fantastic politicians that have been allied and really pushed for change, you know, and it's been completely cross-party and both chambers.
Brilliant.
I have to say the majority of them have been women, but there have been some fantastic men too. But, you know, it's been incredible seeing democracy at work, but it's also been, you know, quite a salutary experience seeing how hard you have to fight to get these things done.
Yeah.
But you can get them done.
Yeah.
And how fortunate are we to be living in a democracy where, as a woman of no standing, essentially, can just through
Will
determination
and
speaking to our government, using the government for what they're there for, that change can be had. You know, if in Afghanistan, I wouldn't even be able to speak on the street.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be a bit more positive about our democracy and the fact that we're living in a democracy, particularly when we look at what's happening in America and the legislation that's coming in and that is already in around this particularly, but also just in terms of the Employment Rights Bill in general, is going to be making Britain leading in terms of employment rights and human rights.
Yeah.
And that's something we should be proud of.
And are you proud of yourself?
I'm not sure that I can say proud, but I think I have got to a point where I'm at a point where I can go, okay, I've done the job.
Well done.
Which is a huge relief.
Yeah.
I think I'm relieved, maybe more than proud. And just, the lightness that I now feel of not waking up in the morning with 4,000 voices in my head, you know, to push this along is a great place to be.
And anyone listening to this who's about to start whatever it is that the question that they want to get answered and thing, they're about to start. Now you've been through it and I know there's still more to do, but the light's at the tunnel now. What advice would you pass to them to help them to keep going?
I think the most important thing that I have learned in the last 7 years was to 100% trust your gut. You must trust your gut. Every time I listened to my gut, it was always right. And if I listened to other people and took other people's advice over my gut, it didn't work out.
Okay.
And I think to add to that, though, remember your gut is what you can personally achieve and do. It doesn't necessarily mean, yes, it's the best way of solving that problem, but it's the best way of solving that problem if you're the one doing it. Yeah. You know, maybe there was a better way of doing this campaign and I could have got this done in 3 years. But on a personal level, I could only do what I could do. And I had to stick to my own personal integrity. And I had to do it the way that felt right for me. And I think if you stick to that, then you will survive. Yeah. If you veer from that, you're much more likely to get crushed.
Yeah.
And also then you start, you know, blaming other people, or, you know, it becomes much more complicated. So listen to your gut. You know, you need to always go with your instinct.
Yeah.
Because your instinct is also protecting you.
Yeah. When we spoke before this show, I voice note a group of girls that I'm in to go, just come off the call with you, because there was something you said in line with that. You said, you're making a decision. Now, somebody else might say that's not the best strategy for this or not the right thing to do here. But that decision is the right decision if it's your decision and at your integrity. And I voice note to my friends, like, listen to this, because I think we get so much noise and so many opinions. And I think sometimes then you start doubting yourself and question. And then before you know it, you've actually lost a bit of the motivation to go and do something, because it's suddenly the noise has made the fears activated, and you start, and I'm talking about this from personal experience, you start overthinking, you start questioning, am I going to look stupid? Is this going to... But it was so pure and you just said it so naturally to me. It was like, if it's your decision, regardless of what anyone else says, it's the right decision for you. And I was like, that for me was so empowering to hear from you. So I just wanted to make sure we got to share that, because it made me feel amazing. And I know my friends messaged back straight away going, I'm putting that on a Post-it note now. That's it.
God, I hope it's right.
But that's the thing. The interesting that you went there. It is right.
And I think, you know, to add to that, I think it makes it sound like, you know, everybody who's giving you opinions and saying things is wrong or bad. But I mean, everyone has an agenda, and we have our own agenda too. And, you know, I had lots of friends who, you know, at the beginning of this process, when I sort of started saying I was going to speak out, most people told me not to. And it wasn't because they were bad or wrong. It was because they were trying to protect me. But actually, it was really unhelpful for me to hear it. Luckily, at that moment, I was so driven to speak out. It just meant that I just didn't ask anybody or tell anybody what I was doing. And I continued like that for 3-4 years. I literally didn't say anything to anybody because I didn't want to have to explain. And I could feel the truth so clearly, what I needed to do. Once the organisation started of Can't Buy My Silence, I mean, I laugh when I say organisation because still was basically only me for 3 years, and then I got some help with Oscar, but it meant that I started sort of second guessing a bit more and going, well, what's better for the organisation? And that's when I realised, no, I just still have to listen. I have to go with what my gut says, and I do believe in a way that what has given this campaign the success, because I never had a big board of directors. I never had, you know, a lot of, huge amount of, I mean, I had some funders, but I didn't have funders who were going to get involved or who I had to, you know, explain things to. I was completely nimble. I could move however I needed to move. And because I was a sort of sole trader, it meant that I could get into rooms much more easily.
Yeah.
You know, and I look at some other campaigns and some other organisations, and they have these incredibly impressive boards and patrons and all of these incredible people. And they've been going for years, and they haven't managed to do what we've managed to do. And it's not just because I've been nimble and on my own. It's mostly because we've been so fortunate with the fact that the media started to pick up and understand, you know, the insidious nature of silencing victims of all sorts, you know, in all sectors. But I think sometimes organisations become cumbersome because
it slows down.
It slows you down particularly in the campaigning environment. But yes, you know, understanding what your actual goal is and sticking to that goal. That doesn't mean you don't question yourself. I mean, I, at the beginning, again, used to absolutely viciously question myself particularly about speaking to people in the media. I'd be like, okay, why am I going to speak to this person? Is it because will it help the campaign, or do I feel flattered that they've asked to speak to me?
Good question.
You know, and that's just checking in with yourself, going, what is that feeling that I'm having? Yeah. Is it like, oh gosh, so-and-so wants to speak to me, it would be fun to be on there. You know, oh, will that give me more profile? That's the wrong feeling. Go deeper. Go, is this going to make the message more powerful? Yeah. And actually, I kept my powder pretty dry in the media. I mean, if you think I've been around for 7 years, basically, you know, I've done a lot, but I've done less than 50%. I've said, you know, no to over 50% of requests. And in a way, I also think that's helpful because you can be overexposed in the media, and the media is so, it's a dangerous environment to be in. Yeah. And so you should only really ever talk if you've got something that someone else can't say, and that's truly coming from a place of integrity. Yeah. And then also, if you get trolled, if you get negative feedback, it doesn't hurt. Yeah.
Because it's coming from a real truth.
Yeah. When people say bad stuff about what I've said, I'm like, it's because they don't understand. I don't feel angry or hurt. I just understand they don't know. Yeah. So it doesn't damage me, and I think that's another really hard thing when you're in any form of public domain, is that you're open to so much vicious criticism. Yeah. But if you're speaking from the heart, you can kind of, again, that kind of gives you a bit of Teflon, because you know what you're saying is right. Yeah.
Thank you. It's been an absolute honour to have this time with you and hear your story. It's a real inspiration. It's just an inspiration and story of resilience and drive and commitment, and wanting to see the right thing done. I'm so sorry it came from such a bad experience. And I think most things change in this world from, someone having to go through pain. But your determination, and it's just been really inspiring for me to also go, use the government. Because for me, I think like the government's way over there, they're untouchable. How do I get to the... But actually, if you just said here, like pretty much, I know people have helped you, but it's been your drive, and you say the organisation was you until Oscar came only recently. You don't fear doing these things on your own. Don't fear going and talking to the government. You say you don't need a board to make change. It's actually, we're very, very powerful as human beings to listen to our truth, listen to our integrity, and take action, and then collect the people that are willing to then come on that journey with you to kind of keep you going and keep you supported. And I just think this has been just such a wonderful example of that, of what we are capable as human beings. And when you do, that courage to make change, so we can actually make courage just more, is normal to do the things you talk about.
Well, I feel, unbelievably privileged to have been able to turn something negative into a positive, because the majority of people who do speak up, who do come into the public domain, who do go up against the big guns, don't get that opportunity. And I am genuinely thankful, because so much of that is luck. It really is. That the media chose to be sympathetic to me, and that I managed to catch a moment. It's not a given that stuff like this works out. And I feel incredibly fortunate to have been able
to take it where it has.
To turn this experience. Painful as it has been doing it.
It's been worth it.
It's been worth it, and it's made me grow as a human being and make me feel at peace in a way that nothing else ever has.
I'm so grateful you've got that. And I'm so grateful to you for everything you've done. And thank you for coming on the show. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for everyone listening or watching. I know there's so much to take out from this episode. If anyone needs to reach out or have any messages or questions, please do get in touch. And if there's anything for Zelda, we'll get in touch with Zelda. But please, I hope you feel supported by this, encouraged by this, and inspired to, when you want to do the right thing, we are so empowered to do that as human beings. So thank you. If you've been enjoying the Courageous Leaders podcast, we'd love it if you'd subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us keep creating quality content and reaching more leaders like you who are ready to grow and make a real impact. We fund this podcast ourselves, so every subscription truly makes a difference and allows us to support courageous leaders like you. Thank you for being part of the journey.